So welcome everyone to our next main stage panel. We have a different format for you this afternoon and a small spotlight chat. Today we're going to talk to Manuel Garcia Herranz from Unicef's Office of Innovation to discuss the role of innovation and technology in approaching some of the world's most complex problems relating to protecting and promoting the well-being of vulnerable children around the world. Manuel is a chief scientist at Unicef's Office of Innovation and ICT's Big Data, Data Science, and AI initiative. At Unicef, he focuses on bridging the gap between data science and the most vulnerable, exploring how to apply big data, complex systems theory, and artificial intelligence to help the most deprived and invisible. Fields of application include growing humanitarian problems such as epidemics, natural disasters, and migration, as well as transversal issues such as poverty, data representativeness, and algorithmic equity. Manuel holds a PhD in computer science from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. He joined UNICEF in 2014 and has been since working to bring the value of big data to UNICEF, leading research at UNICEF's Office of Innovation and creating collaboration networks and data science tools that focus on the problems of the most vulnerable children. Manuel, we welcome you. There goes his video. Thanks for being here today. And I think this is a really great chance to, unfortunately, we don't have too much time, but to spend some time on a very distinct issue that may be overlooked in a lot of our other panels. So my first question to you is that UNICEF's report on AI and children mentioned that children are already interacting with AI technologies in many different ways. They are embedded in toys, virtual assistants, video games, and adaptive learning software. Algorithms provide recommendations to children on what videos to watch next, what news to read, what music to listen to, who to be friends with. However, little attention is paid to how AI systems will affect children and their rights. Can you tell us more about this?
Great. Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you very much for inviting me and UNICEF here. Yes, I think you were mentioning on the guide that we recently delivered the second version of it, and you are pointing into that space of children interacting with AI. But I think it's important to remember that the full ecosystem is not just about children interacting with AI, it's AI interacting with children also. And it's also children interacting with other children and with the world through AI. And all of those, I mean, they represent a lot of new challenges for the world in general, but some of them specifically for children. You were mentioning some in relation to private sector, toys and games and video recommendation, but there is also a lot related to the public sector, judiciary systems, access to healthcare, all those things that are more and more seeing the potential of being driven by AI. I think, I mean, if you check on the policies, you will see that there are some kind of generic broad principles and recommendations, and those refer to the children's rights and how they need to be accounted for. In general, those rights are highly generic. If we go to them, the two first rights, for example, is no discrimination. The second one is best interest of the child. And there are 54, and around the 30-something is everybody should know these children's rights. And that points, in my opinion, in some of the biggest issues that we have with the world on AI, which is that there is this huge gap between the ones that can build AI and where that AI is being built, with what kind of expertise, what kind of training, and the rights of children. And in many times, AI systems, they are not able to distinguish whether they are interacting with a child or with an adult, and that's where a bunch of problems starts. You can't really preserve on the rights of children if you don't know if what the system is interacting with is a kid or it is not. I think there are many things that affect to adults too, but for children there are even more important, like the right for creativity, and that's very important, and it's preserved on the children's right. When you have algorithms that are driven by feeding you whatever resonates more with what you know already, somehow you create those silos and that hyper tuning, and that affects children in a very specific way. When society is being driven by algorithms through social media, in which other users are a little bit of a product, we don't know what are the repercussions that might have onto children, right? And that's about children interacting with the rest of humanity through algorithms and through AI. So that speaks a little bit about the generic, but the truth is that these general principles, as I was saying before, they first, in my opinion, speak about the divide and the gap that exists between children and children's rights. And if we talk about the most vulnerable children and humanitarian development, the gap is even bigger, and we can talk more about that later. And on the second side, on how does this new world look for children and what they're able to do, and that has to do with the specificity. We can talk about AI in general, but the truth is that we need to drill down in what are we really talking about. Are we talking about a predictive analytics system for whether you are going to commit a crime again or not? And that's where you need to begin thinking about how does these affect children or not. And pairing that in many countries, for example, when you are 18, you have that right of starting fresh, so to speak. If you have a criminal record before, that kind of right to start fresh, it happens in many countries. With AI, we don't know how that works or whether even how governments can implement that, right? So I think it is very important to drill down into specifics and give things context on use cases and applications to really embed those children's rights.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot there, but maybe we'll move on to one of our other questions and then come back when we have time. You mentioned before this chat, we had a chat before this that went on for almost an hour, so you the audience can know how hard it is to cram this all into 15 minutes. But you mentioned this capacity gap, how AI talent and capacity is clustered often far from the most vulnerable. Why is that a huge problem? How can we, or are you at UNICEF working to close this type of gap?
Yeah, in my opinion, that's probably the hardest one to see, because it speaks about a systemic problem, in the sense of I think we've learned in the hard way and how important is diversity in designing systems, and the lack of diversity, how it leads to many blind spots and to discriminations of many types. When we're talking about AI, is not just on the better known diversity issues that we see a problem in. It's also about the sectors and the countries, and we see how most of the AI capacity worldwide is clustered in private sector, is clustered in specific countries, and that makes so difficult for the AI community in general to begin thinking and developing and solving problems that fall outside of those realms of action. If you go into places like Kaggle, for example, for training data sets, even if you're a student in a university and you want to do something and train something, you go to Kaggle, you find those data sets. They're going to speak a lot about, well, it's interesting to see what are the top 10 in there, but you have like orders from food delivery services, pizza prices. Somewhere in there this year, it has started to appear something related to COVID, but you have nothing on, how buildings look like in Mozambique. You have a lot of training data sets for mapping infrastructure. They speak about how infrastructure looks like in the US, in Europe, in developed places, in big cities. When you look into the training that computer scientists received, as well as the task force that composes different organizations, you will see that capacity gap. Is so difficult to actually find groups of AI experts in governments, in UN organizations like UNICEF, NGOs. In the same way that it's very difficult to find university programs that teach about human rights or that have courses on AI for development. And that is a gap that we can only close by collaborating in both sides of the equation. So realizing that one part has many unknowns on the technology side, and the technology side has many unknowns on the complexities of humanitarian development. And in my opinion, that's one of the biggest issues that we have on how can we close that gap that actually expands at the speed of technology development, which is quite exponential, right? So that's what I mean by the capacity gap.
And I think you mentioned to me a few examples into
Yes.
that. For instance, one was that when we talk about accuracy of a tool, the average accuracy, it's very distorted if you look at the accuracy by location, right?
That is very true. I mean, we've had examples in which you have, let's build a AI machine learning, such as with, yes, satellite image, we can estimate poverty. And there are papers about that, and the way the accuracy is being reported is kind of like the R-score. You have an R-score of 0.8. That's very good. 0.9. That's amazing. One of the things that we found is that the error is not equally distributed, but you actually find that you commit those algorithms. They fail more in poor places, meaning that your poverty detection algorithm is very good at distinguishing the rich from the very rich, from the mediumly rich, from the medium income, but it's not so good in distinguishing the really poor from the almost poor, which, I mean, from a poverty detection algorithm, it's where all the accuracy needs to be, but we lack even the technical language to describe that. You were asking me on how do we solve that capacity gap, and I forgot to answer that. There are different ways. One has been on creating internal capacity, and that's what UNICEF has done at the beginning through the Office of Innovation, and now with other divisions, ICT, the Data and Analytics division, and investing more in internal capacity. That's on one side. Second, realizing that that's not something that can be done internally, but building networks, such as in the case of UNICEF, the Data for Children Collaborative with the University of Edinburgh, so that we can collaborate with scientists from all over the world through some academic institutions. Other mechanisms have been the venture fund, for example, in UNICEF, which is a venture capital taking no equity that is basically investing in startups, for-profit startups, with two conditions. One, that what they do is open source. Second, that they are based in program countries. So one of those countries where UNICEF works. And that is aiming at making that ecosystem of AI experts and companies a little bit more diverse and more varied. And in that sense, the venture fund investing at different rates of technologies. AI is one of them. One of the latest calls that I saw, they are looking for companies that are either investing in automation, and understanding that with automation, it comes the potential for the democratization of a lot of services that in the past were just for a few. Optimization of services, or the creation of data sets for training. So trying to close the gap in different areas, most on capacity and others on, that hope that at some point in Kaggle, in the first 3-4 data sets, you have things that matter not just to people that live in Madrid, in San Francisco, New York, in Berlin, or in Munich, right? But they speak more about the other realities that are much pressing in the world.
Thanks. I think obviously there's a lot here, and I think we could go on with examples for the rest of the hour. But I'm glad we got a chance in this conference to talk about, I think, this particularly interesting and important issue that's often underlooked. I mean, we talked about yesterday, we had our panel on diversity and inclusiveness, and who is very often left out in terms of voice is children, right? Who just don't often have the ability to be places like today. I mean, we should have a panel with children on it or something.
Which is one of the rights of children, by the way, the right to be heard.
Right. So I think we talked about how different ways that voices need to be involved in the AI development process, whether that's on the side of development or of use, and making sure the rights are in place and that our frameworks acknowledge this diversity, right, and this inclusion. So thank you so much for being here. I would urge everyone to check out the UNICEF Office of Innovation to learn more about your work, and thanks for being here again.
A couple of links more, just in case anybody's interested in the Responsible Data for Children, rd4c.org. You'll find more things about UNICEF on data, and the Data for Children Collaborative. If you check on that, you will find also more stuff on these things.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Caitlin, for
thank you very much.
us.
We can throw those links up on the TRAIF Twitter as well. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll see all the rest of you at our next session at 1. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.